wretched condition without the remedy. It opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but to no ladder upon which to get out. In moments of agony, I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. I have often wished myself a beast. I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It was pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Freedom now appeared to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was ever present to torment me with a sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. It looked from every star. It smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm.
I was 16 years old when I literally found Frederick Douglass. Born and raised in Chicago, I was a student at Lyle Senior High School when a teacher who was getting ready to retire asked me to help her move some boxes. Way in the back of a shelf, I found a ratty copy of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I asked the teacher if I could buy it from her. She told me I could keep it. I read it cover to cover that night, and I started feeling guilty. Douglass' writing was beautiful, and as I lingered over his prose, I thought, if a slave could have this command over the English language, what excuse do I have? As a child, I was taught the value of hard work, and I learned to accomplish my goals. Every time we could afford to move to a nicer place, we did. And as a result, we moved 13 times in 13 years. I was a good student, but up until that point, I had only given the minimum effort required to achieve A's and B's. Reading Frederick Douglass was a turning point in my life, and I began applying myself more in school. The same teacher who asked me to help her move the boxes told me that I was being placed in honors English. I asked her, why would I want to do 5 times more work? But my protest fell on deaf ears. She had already got my mom on board with the idea, and she had entered a short story I wrote that year into a national contest, and at the age of 16, I became a published author. Fast forward to the present. I have a bachelor's of English literature and composition, a master's of English education. I've taught in Kenya and East Africa 3 times. I've published 3 books. And currently, I'm an English teacher at Martin Luther King Academy for Fayette County Public Schools. Conventional teaching methods did not work at MLK. The mercurial nature of the students we served lent for little continuity of lesson planning. Instead of using texts to teach the standards, I started using standards to teach the text. I began by selecting classic literature and reading to and often with my students. I would say, we're reading this book, and we're opening on page 1, and we will finish on page 350. You have to decide whether you are going to be on board, but you are not going to stop our reading.
We started kindergarten at Tates Creek Elementary.
I was in 1st or 2nd grade when I first noticed substance abuse in our household.
We moved to Breckenridge Elementary in the 3rd grade. We were good students.
I liked to learn, and I wanted to be a businessman and wear suits every day when I grew up.
I wanted to be an NBA star. We switched to Liberty Elementary in 4th grade, and I got my first D a year later.
In 6th grade, we went to Morton Middle School. Incarceration had become a routine affliction for our household. I got my first C.
We started getting Fs in middle school.
By then, we were already getting into trouble.
We kept pushing each other to take more risk and commit increasingly serious crimes. By 8th grade, we were smoking weed, and most of our middle school friends were scared to hang out with us.
A lot of people in our family even stopped talking to us. We were getting high at school. In 9th grade at Henry Clay, my attitude was so bad, I got a D in PE.
I got an F.
We pushed each other to do worse, not to be scared of anything. We were only hanging out with adults at this point.
We failed 9th grade. That summer, we got locked up.
You were not allowed to talk there. You were in a cell by yourself. I was in a different unit from Tyler. Being in there made me want to do worse, to see how far we could actually go.
We had not talked for 2 weeks, but we both had the same aspiration. Our mindsets had grown darker. It is hard to explain, but taking risks and breaking laws became something we wanted to do even more.
I stopped thinking about school. I still wanted to graduate, but I didn't care how.
When we got out in August, school had already started. We were enrolled at Henry Clay, but I will not say we were students.
About a month into school, we were involved in a pretty bad fight, and they sent us to Martin Luther King Academy.
At MLK, the worse you are, the more respect you get from other students.
And we got lots of respect. Other students were scared of us. We would go to school drunk or high, and I was making a lot of money in an unwholesome way. I had the attitude that if I was going to live this lifestyle, I was going to be at the top.
I respected Mr. Collins because he was not scared of anybody, and he would not back down.
We read from an obscure book by Machiavelli called The Art of War, in which he wrote, "Perhaps you will also desire to learn what parts a captain ought to have. In this I will satisfy you in a brief manner, for I would not knowingly select any other man than one who should know how to do all those things which we have discussed today."
And these would still not be enough for him if he did not know how to find them out by himself, for no one without imagination was ever very great in his profession.
And if imagination makes for honor in other things, it will above all honor you in this one.
I would go home and talk with Tate about the books we read and the movies we watched.
Precisely, but shall we add more certainly the boy outside?
Yes. But you might be able to get around him, Joel, as you did the one in Istanbul. What was his name?
You mean the one you couldn't get to cut? This is the second time that you've laid hands on me. When you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
I liked the gritty movies because the antagonists were people I aspired to be.
We had earned enough credits by the spring that would be starting school as juniors in August. That summer, we got arrested again for an incident involving deadly weapons and illegal substances.
This time, there was a Bible in the cell. I started reading.
In a separate cell, in a separate unit, without knowing what was going on with Tyler, I was reading it too.
They got out 26 days later, changed.
I was compelled by what I was reading, but I was deep into a toxic concoction of power, and I was not sure if I could get out.
When Tyler came to school that fall, he was wearing an ankle bracelet, but we did not talk about that. We kept on reading.
I was also in Mr. Khan's class that fall, and the literature we were reading at school connected to the Bible I was reading at home. One day, during Mr. Collins' lunch, Tyler and I asked him about those connections.
I said, if you want to talk about reading something like the Bible, you're not going to fake me out. I'm not going to tell you what's in there. You can come and tell me what you've read. So they asked me, how much should we read? I said, no fewer than 10 chapters a night. They came back the next day having read 40. So I met with them on my planning period. One day, a week later, they had read only 4. I told them, come back tomorrow when you read your 16. After that, they never let me down again. I had 3 ground rules. No lying, no drugs or alcohol, no excuses. Their enthusiasm and determination were glaring. I deliberately constructed a trajectory of literature, film, and music for them to pursue in class as well as at home that would inspire them to move from one mindset and way of life to another.
The more I learned, the less I knew.
Reading Seneca's epistles and moral treatises was a turning point. I remember when Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short space of time, but that we waste much of it. Life is long enough, and it has been given in sufficiently generous measure to allow the accomplishment of the very greatest things if the whole of it is well invested."
But when it is squandered in luxury and carelessness, when it is devoted to no good end, forced at last by the ultimate necessity, we perceive that it has passed away before we were aware that it was passing. So it is. The life we receive is not short, but we make it so. Nor do we have any lack of it, but are wasteful of it.
Just as great and princely wealth is scattered in a moment when it comes into the hands of a bad owner, while wealth, however limited, if it is entrusted to a good guardian, increases by use, so our life is amply long for him who orders it properly.
I made a chart for them showing the 24 hours in a day, and their assignment was to write down how they were spending their time in a week. Once they considered how much time they were wasting, they committed to getting the most life out of their time. I challenged them to exercise their bodies as well as their brains. I suggested that they do 300 push-ups, 200 crunches, and 100 sit-ups each day.
I asked Mr. Collins, how long should that take? He told me no more than 30 minutes. The first time I did it, it took 4 hours.
30 days later, we were under 30 minutes with time to spare. I saw my body changing as my intelligence was growing. I didn't think it was humanly possible.
My intellectual capacity grew, and I discovered I had new solutions I had not thought of before.
As we were seeing the results of the good things we were doing, we began pushing each other in a different way.
If he read 12 chapters and I'd only read 10, I would stay up, and I would read 3 more just to get ahead.
I realized that if I put my effort into something, I could get it done. I had the power to make things happen.
Our routine became to read the Bible and work out every morning, then read on the bus on the way to school. Evenings were spent reading books Mr. Collins gave us, like The Brain That Changed Itself, The Shallows, Homer's Iliad,
Plato's Timaeus and Critias, Machiavelli's Art of War and the Prince, the works of Pope Benedict XVI,
Aeschylus's Suppliant Maidens and Seven Against Thebes, Mind Shines Under the Microscope, Darwin's Origin of Species, and Musashi's Book of Five Rings.
When we were not reading, we were listening to fine music by artists such as Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, and Mozart, and taking lecture courses in complexity theory, game theory, astronomy, and neuroscience fundamentals.
We kept on reading during my class and worked through great literature, including The Island of Dr. Moreau, War of the Worlds, The Complete Sherlock Holmes, Edgar Allan Poe, Treasure Island, Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the poetry of John Keats and Lord Byron. As Frederick Douglass once wrote, "It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake."
Harry, what is it?
In 6 months, Tyler and Tate completed 2 years of high school. They earned ACT scores that qualified them for Ivy League schools. And the University of Kentucky offered them full scholarships. More importantly, they recognized who they were and what they wanted to change. They learned that by adopting self-discipline in everything, that they could become better versions of themselves.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
I realized I was getting better in every other way. I might as well go to college to ensure a brighter future.
I wanted to live a better life. I didn't want to have to live on Section 8 or welfare. I wanted to be independent.
Like Frederick Douglass, I was able to transcend my circumstances and escape the shackles of my self-imposed mental slavery.
Very soon after I went to live with Mr. and Mrs. Auld, she very kindly commenced to teach me the ABC. It was a new and special revelation explaining dark and mysterious things with which my youthful understanding had struggled, but struggled in vain. I now understand what had been to me a most perplexing difficulty: the power to enslave. It was a grand achievement, and I prized it highly. From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom.